So I don't have the got it screen, but you do. This is so funny.
There we go.
Yes.
Okay. So call to order. I'd like to welcome the Library Planning Committee, who is present this evening, as well as the public present, and the folks that are on Zoom. Given the fact that this is a public meeting, it's been posted as such, we have two little items that we have to do prior to the presentation. One is public comment, and the second is the acceptance of the meeting, the minutes from January. So we'll do a public comment first, but before we do that, let me just go over a couple little items here. If you wish to make a comment, I'd ask you to identify yourself. This is not a time for question and answer, it's a time for comment. And all comments are to be directed to me as chair, not anybody else on the dais this evening. And lastly, all comments are regulated to 3 minutes. So if you go beyond 3 minutes, I'm going to tell you that it's 3 minutes, and I'm going to ask you to kindly move aside and have somebody else have their turn. So therefore, any public comment this evening? Well, that was easy. With all public comments being exhausted, we'll move into the next required item, which is the discussion and acceptance of the minutes of the board from January 18th. Any discussion from board members? Can I have a motion to accept?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. So quickly, we are moving to our presentation. So Jane, if you would introduce to the folks here and those on Zoom, our presenters, and we'll move forward with that.
Sure, Judge. Thank you. I'm Jane Kane. I'm the library director for the town of Yarmouth. I'm happy to be here with the town library board and with our library planning committee and our visiting attendees, along with our consultants at Constructive Disruption. We call them CD a lot of times when we're talking about them, and you'll see why, probably. So the library planning committee, the library board, and the town of Yarmouth have been working with Constructive Disruption now for about 6 months. As you may be aware, we would like to prepare Yarmouth to apply for a substantial grant from the Mass Board of Library Commissioners, the MBLC, to improve library facilities and services in Yarmouth. This is a process that has been decades in the making. There are reports from consultants and architects going back to the 1970s. The MBLC grant application right now is due at the end of May, and we've all been working pretty hard on getting our data aligned and our ducks in a row to get ready for that exciting milestone. CD works with local governments and libraries with a particular focus on strategic planning, evaluation, workforce organization, a lot of different contemporary topics. CD Constructive Disruption is led by the founding principal, Stephanie Chase, who you can see on your screen, in partnership with Judah Hamer, who's also on the screen, and they work with consultants around the United States. Past clients have included the Cranston, Rhode Island Public Library, the Wellesley Free Library, our own Mass Library System, the San Rafael Library Recreation Department, Santa Clara, California County Library System, Eugene, Oregon's Public Library, and many other organizations. We're delighted to be working with Stephanie and Judah. Between the two of them, they have about 40 years library leadership experience, and they've been a great support to me and to the committee with putting together a recent survey and other community assessment exercises. And we'll hear all about that today. Today's meeting will be made available to the public through the town's YouTube website. So it's being recorded today on Zoom, and in a few days, you'll be able to tune into YouTube and rewatch it and tell all your friends and neighbors, share it as you wish. We're excited. I'm going to turn it over now to Judah Hamer of CD, Constructive Disruption. Thanks, kids.
Sure. Thank you for that introduction and background, Jane. I'm really thrilled to be here tonight to give an overview and really kind of walk through some of the high level outcomes of the study that we've done and give a little bit more context. And Jane, I really appreciate the setup. Stephanie, I thought I'm going to start to lead the presentation, and I would just like to acknowledge my teammate Stephanie here. We've worked together a long time, as you can tell, as you've heard from Jane. And so sometimes we just chime in because this is the product of a great working relationship. So I'm going to share my screen so that you have some visuals for what we'll talk through. And I've titled this a Modern Public Library in Yarmouth because it's really clear at a high level that there's such a valuation of what the library does here in town, but also what the library could do if it had modernized facilities. And Jane, you certainly intimate the importance of that. And so just an overview of where we're headed tonight in terms of contents. We'll talk a little bit about why now and why change. Jane, you mentioned that, and I'll add on to that just a little bit. And then I'll talk about the community needs assessment portion of the work we've done. So, and I will do that through the lens as we walk through pieces of what's come out from our study of the Town of Yarmouth Vision Plan. Because as you all know, a library doesn't exist in a silo in a community. It's part of the fabric of the community. You are in a great position here in town for looking at the outcomes of our study through this lens, because you really have a fresh, fairly new vision plan that's been recently, like a year or so ago, approved by your select board, that heavy community involvement. So it's a great opportunity to say, how does the library fit into that? And that community's vision plan has 4 components: live, work, play, and learn. So we'll just walk through those pieces. That's how we go if you're looking at the numbers from slides 5 to 20. And then at the end, we'll talk about what's next and what that means. So let's just circle back to why now. And some of what I have to say will echo in an additive way to what Jane shared. So there is this opportunity from the MBLC, the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners. It's really our state library agency through their construction program for Yarmouth to improve library services in a way that doesn't entirely rely on local funds and municipal bonding. So it's like, yep, that's great. We like that in most of our towns that we live in. And the MBLC has tiers for matching dollars to put up for a project. It's often between 40 and 60% of the total cost. So, you know, the town puts up $5, maybe the state puts up $4, $5, $6, depending on the total cost and scale of the project. And you can look that up online. And we're not there yet because we don't know the total cost. That's really the next phase. So this really is a financial opportunity at this point in time to try to address some facilities questions. It's where we're at now, and to make the most of the state program and to consider tapping into these resources, really the state dollars. We've worked with Yarmouth to come almost to the completion point of phase 1. And there's still considerable decision-making to be done across the community. So we've had many conversations during phase 1. There's still many conversations to be had next. The very next part of phase 1, we're doing, this is our first public presentation really of this whole set of findings that we have found. And the next one will be at a select board meeting. But the very next part, kind of bookend to this chapter, if you will, is for the community to make a decision about whether it will proceed to phase 2. And that will happen at town meeting. The will of the community to proceed is a prerequisite for phase 2. So there will be a vote at that town meeting on whether the town will appropriate $150,000 for a design phase. So that's really the entrance fee, so to speak, for phase 2. That amount comes from the MBLC. That amount would also mean, just some mechanics, that the MBLC would give $75,000 additional dollars, so that Yarmouth as a town would have $225,000 to look ahead at applying the research we've done, some research that you all brought to the table that we used and incorporated in our work to really do the design phase of the library. So in our engagements with the public, it's absolutely clear that there's consensus that something should be done to move the libraries forward, to improve facilities in order to strengthen current services and nurture new ones. But before I move with this, had kind of like with what I'm going to talk about here, I know that Stephanie knows that many of you in this room know that, like, there's the question in Yarmouth, which is, where will a new library go? Where will a newly renovated library go? Is it west? Is it south? This is absolutely a question for phase 2. We can't even have this conversation until the town has made a commitment to designing a library, because the commitment needs to happen. The decision to move forward needs to happen before you even decide what it looks like to move forward. So that's not part of this presentation, but I'd just like to recognize, I know that there's interest. Stephanie knows there's interest. Most of you in this room who are involved and stakeholders of the library know there's interest. And that's really the next chapter of this process. It's really phase 2. So we'll get through phase 1.
Yeah,
And
I think in Judah, just to really emphasize, the MBLC as part of this granting program does not want to see that you have made a decision. A community like Yarmouth that has a lot of opportunity is exactly the kind of community that the MBLC guidelines are really written for. So I know it feels really hard. I think we both know it feels really hard to feel like not having an answer, but not having an answer is really where the state wants you to be at this point in their process, right? Again, to kind of move through these phased steps toward ultimately, hopefully, if the grant is successful, as Judah mentioned, a very large match for the construction costs.
And that success would, thanks, Stephanie, that was a great transition too, would set you up for phase 3. And that's a designed library that's submitted to the state for matching funds with a decision about where it goes, what it looks like. And by designed library, we mean either a new library, a brand new library, or an addition or renovation of an existing facility. It is either or, and it is a renovation or addition of one facility or another that you have as part of Yarmouth Town Libraries, because the state recognizes Yarmouth Town as an entire entity, not 3 distinct villages. So that's a constraint on the granting as well to keep in mind. I know it would be like, great, we could fix it all. The granting program simply doesn't provide for that in its structure. So let's take a look at why change. And Jane, I keep thinking I'm going to turn 50 and almost as old as I am. For 50 years, there have been about 5 professional studies on Yarmouth Town Libraries, and they've all reported existing facilities to be grossly usable space, modern building systems, ADA accessibilities, and certainly public meeting rooms or program space, as many of you sit in the single program space that you have in Yarmouth in its libraries. So why, we might ask, did community leadership and stakeholders even make the effort to do these studies? It's because it's been clear for so long at a community level that the facilities constrain the capacity of the library to serve the community as well as it can or should. This is the most compelling reason to consider why change in Yarmouth when it comes to libraries. Like, just why not preserve the status quo? It's not because libraries in Yarmouth are behind peers across the state, and we do benchmarking, and you'll hear about that in a minute. Our study shows that. It's because for Yarmouth, the library facilities themselves don't come close to supporting or sustaining the services that people in the community want from the libraries. So from a within community aspiration, not just comparing to the neighbors, people want something different, and they want something more than can be provided in the current facilities. We do benchmarking as a way to think about what's possible, what might it look like for Yarmouth, what might Yarmouth aspire to. But in the end, it's the community needs and aspirations that drive and signal what needs to change in town. So to submit a grant to the MBLC, Yarmouth, as Jane mentioned, needs to do a completed community needs assessment and a library building plan. They're kind of really interlocking, because what the community needs and wants really drives what gets envisioned for a new library facility or a newly renovated library facility. So a needs assessment, in a nutshell, is kind of self-explanatory in that it's really just about studying people in town, who they are, all the nuances, demographics, what their lives look like, learning about that, seeing how the library intersects those lives, and how it could intersect those lives, support people, help them be nurtured and grow and connect to the community, but can't because there are conditions that prevent that from happening. So the library building plan takes these findings and what we know about the buildings and how the community uses library services within the buildings and connecting to them from outside. It packages these findings in information that really are the components of a new library facility or a new addition onto an existing facility that often in these cases of these projects involves major renovation on an existing facility, which many of you I know in the room know Yarmouth needs some renovations just to strengthen the existing structures. As part of this, we benchmark Yarmouth against other libraries in the state, and this gives us a sense of how the library will compare to towns that are comparable in population size or other demographics. And it provides a guidepost for this envisioning of a library that's aspirational for Yarmouth, but at the same time, I think very pragmatic. And for me, there's a simple example of how to think about this. If we doubled the size of the square footage of how big you have in both West and South in Yarmouth, Yarmouth would simply be on par with peers across the state. So it would be transformative for Yarmouth, but also it's very middle of the road. It's not kind of a Taj Mahal, like big, resort style library. It's just kind of putting you on a fair and even footing with what you're providing your community with what's provided in so many other communities in the state. So benchmarking at times can seem really removed and abstract from the day-to-day reality of people who are living in a town. And this is one of the reasons we really have looked closely at our work along with what else is happening in the community. Many of you in the room, the Library Planning Committee, the Advisory Board, Jane, other stakeholders in town have really helped us keep our work connected to the larger community. And in the heart of this presentation, we really focus on the core of assessment, what really makes sense for people who live in town, especially year-rounders, but certainly also the seasonal residents and visitors. And so, as I've mentioned before, to contextualize this in the broader fabric of the community, we're going to talk about our findings in the context of the Town of Yarmouth Vision Plan. And this is because the library really has the potential to contribute to this vision in so many different ways. For some of you in the room, you know that our findings are packaged in a different report that's much, much longer. I think it's near 200 pages now. That packaging, as a sidebar, is designed to help you all apply for the MBLC grant without having to take our findings and kind of repackage them. And so Jane's not sitting and having to redo all of that with a team of people. It's to help get you ready for phase 2. So we've really designed the delivery of our findings just to help you all as a community move ahead. But for this presentation, for a community look about what this means for the broader community, we're stepping back and looking at the vision plan. And so some of you might be familiar with themes in the vision plan in Yarmouth of live, work, play, and learn. There are 4 major components identified in this vision plan, and it promulgates the plan specific goals related to the vision. So if you go to the town site, you can really look through at length about what the town envisions for each of these kind of spheres of, what it means to be in a community. And so the vision plan was crafted to inform what in many towns are called a local comprehensive plan. Like, where are we going as a town, as a city, as a village, which serves as Yarmouth's long view of a master plan for itself. The plan's designed to serve as a reference point as town leaders identify future goals, initiatives, and resource allocations to better serve residents. So it's really a guidepost for where are we headed? How do we make the best decisions on the community? And so what we're going to do here next is walk through highlights of the needs assessment within this town-adopted, town-supported framework for where Yarmouth should go, and see how strengthening library facilities would position the town to move ahead on its town-wide plan. So let's jump right into live. So the vision plan describes Yarmouth as being a great place to live because it has high caliber municipal facilities. So you have some of that and you aspire to some of that. Yarmouth Town Libraries are uniquely positioned, this is from the plan, as local, free, and open public spaces that support ideas expressed in the plan in regards to this, such as this is from the plan, welcome vulnerable community members. This is what Yarmouth wants to do. Offer robust services and facilities for older residents and active seniors, and nurture a strong sense of community that fosters belonging and inclusivity. I always like to point out that libraries are one of the very few public spaces in town that are indoors, that are not gate kept in any way. There's no gatekeeping in libraries. Anybody can walk in. And so surveyed the public and engaged people in interviews and focus groups, it's really clear that people see the role the library takes now, and they also see that the library can play a more prominent role given additional supports and capacity to forward these goals. And so here you have on this slide, just for adults, that there's really strong interest in some specific examples of what this can look like. For example, 2/3 of the community are interested in wellness type activities, not sports necessarily, just wellness overall. About 1/3 are interested in programs in languages that are other than English, 1/3. And the younger the respondent, the stronger the interest. And about 2 out of 3 respondents are interested in socializing with others in person through an activity. I sometimes think in many towns, these things used to happen through other organizations, and often people look to libraries to fill a gap where other organizations have kind of taken a back seat in their life. So libraries are a non-denominational, egalitarian way for people to connect with others. Let's look ahead at Live for Children. When we ask the community about programming for children, it's an astonishingly high level of support for special performances for the whole family. 8 out of 10 people, or 4 out of 5 people are interested. 3 out of 4 people are interested in literacy-based activities. 3 out of 4 people are interested in seeing STEM-based activities for children. These are activities that focus on science, technology, education, engineering, and math. To see these things happen in the library, they see the potential as the library partnering in the community outside of a formal school environment for kids to participate. And when we drill down on teens, we see there's still very strong interest in the library playing a role. Teen advisory groups, for those who haven't heard of these, are kind of like a youth group for teens that's connected to the library. And it's a really important way for teens to feel connected to what's happening for them in a library. And 3 out of 4 people are interested in seeing this happen at the library, to seeing in-person activities for teens, for socialization, and for seeing classes like coding and game design, some of which overlap with STEM and some of which don't. And the upshot of these expressed community interests is that they all have facilities implications for the library, because a library needs different kind of spaces for doing these things, and different spaces for different age groups and target audiences in the community. So let's move on to work. Modern libraries support remote work capability and collaboration. They absolutely have the position in a community to do this. And so the vision plan relates an aspiration for Yarmouth to be a great place to work, which includes a thriving year-round economy with a variety of employment opportunities and businesses. So we know Yarmouth Town Libraries can support this progress with modernized facilities that provide for remote work capability and community collaboration, and provide access to a robust technological infrastructure designed for how people work today and what technology they need on hand to make that work happen. And the community really sees, when we surveyed them, the library as having a role. 2 out of 3 respondents under 60. So folks who are early to absolutely mid-career and almost in that, just about looking at their late career, see the library as a place where they can be in a small group and work together, or they want places in the library that feel like an individual office. 3 out of 5 people say if they had access to these places, these spaces in the library, they'd be likely or very likely to fold the library in as a destination to where they do remote working and learning as well. So we also know that working spaces for some can have a more casual design. We've all been through Starbucks where people are kind of on a sofa, or your local coffee shop. And so we can see that there's also interest in spaces where people can just kind of have comfortable lounge-like spaces to remotely work, learn, to just relax. And that as part of all of this, people are absolutely interested in a strong and robust wireless network and lots of places to store and charge their own devices. People bring their devices in. It's important for the library to offer hardware, but people, of course, walk around with portable technology, and they're really looking for a place to plug that in. And even though we know people come with their portable technology, we also know that there are people in town who don't have the same level of access to technology that perhaps some of us on this call have, because we're either remote and so we have a device to do that, or we're in a room and we might know that this is a piece of our lives. So if we look at some of the data about Yarmouth, 1 in 6 households have just a single device to support the entire family's digital needs, suggesting that there is a need for other options to get to hardware in the community. And certainly the library can be a destination for that. And 8% of Yarmouth households don't have an internet subscription at all. That means these people rely on publicly accessible Wi-Fi networks for access. And certainly the library is a primary destination where there's no expectation that you're buying or paying for anything. You can just show up as you are and tap into that technological infrastructure that's so key to remote work capability and collaboration, and remote work learning as well. So work and play, right? Kind of a yin and yang of life. So let's move on to play. The vision plan refers to the aspiration for Yarmouth to be a great place to play, with community members having access to opportunities to socialize through civic and social clubs, volunteerism, and community events. The library is already a place where socialization happens. We know this. There's lots of programs and activities for people in all different segments of the community, many more than even I would have expected based on the facilities you actually have. It's really pretty amazing. Compliments to the staff, really. And so a modernized facility would strengthen this role by creating capacity to host and partner with civic and social organizations in town, because the library really doesn't have lots of space for that at this point. Expand the scale and scope of community events, and serve as an indoor option for recreation and entertainment. Because we know Yarmouth has an amazing landscape, as much of the Cape does, for all sorts of outdoor options for recreation and play. But there's definitely also a desire and an interest for indoor play that's distinct from sports-based or fitness-oriented opportunities. And just as an example, if we're thinking about what people shared with us in the survey and other formats, 2 out of 3 people in the survey who are under 60 said they really want a technology-rich lab space with virtual reality and gaming options, that they see the library as a place they can go to for this if it were there. And other people just want the library to be a place where they can bring their kids and socialize and have the room and the space to spend time with others. Hey, I say we're in February. It's kind of the dark times on the Cape, right? It's like, this is exactly when people want to get out of the house and connect with others in a time when it's hard to be outside. It's kind of, well, it was sunny today, but it has been cold and gray for quite a few weeks here, as we all know. So let's take a look at some of the play and learning findings that refer to children, including those who are differently abled. If you take a look at this slide, I'm going to go over this. Some of this font's small because I really wanted to pack this onto the screen. At least 8 out of 10 people are interested in the following: spaces for play-based learning and motor skill development, like activity walls or structures for physical development, or toys or games that are learning-based. 8 out of 10 want space with computer technology and electronic devices that support interactive learning. They want areas with activities that take a STEM approach to learning. It's so big in public education, and what parents are interested and community members are interested for their kids: science, technology, engineering, math. They see this as a way to move forward in education and life. And other people are very aware, that 8 out of 10, that it's really important to have a sensory space to provide calm, focus, and comfort to young people with sensory processing challenges. Often we think of folks who fall into having this need as being on the autism spectrum, and libraries being a place in a community full of shared places that has this kind of safe space designed for folks who need this need, especially children. And so let's shift on to learn. Live, work, play, learn. So learning is in large part dependent on access to content, not entirely, but we're going to start with that as a component and move on to other educational opportunities at the library. So the vision plan explicitly, this is really the one section of the vision plan where it's very direct that the library has a role in making Yarmouth being a great place to learn. And it's not a surprise, right? Because libraries in this country are part of self-education and learning and advancement. And so while we've talked about the library to advance the goals across, these other components of the vision plan, it's the sphere of learning where the vision plan framers really quite directly see the library as having a role. And I love that we can see the library in lots of different ways, but this is perhaps kind of a cornerstone for the vision plan. And the plan expresses a value for Yarmouth. It's committed to educational excellence and lifelong learning. And so again, as the only free and open destination for learning in town that serves all ages, the library's role in the town's vision for lifelong learning is really preeminent. It's the library. The vision plan states that for Yarmouth to be a great place to learn, the library has modernized facilities that offer a variety of activities and programs for all ages, right in the vision plan. So while the library, of course, offers a range of services for a diversity of the people who live in town, these are constrained because the facilities have not been modernized. And we know the library needs to be robust, inclusive of facilities to continue to strive to make Yarmouth a great place to learn. So let's drill down on content. Because of the size of the buildings, the libraries can only offer so much content. And to understand these constraints, we can consider the size of Yarmouth's collection in relation to other libraries. And this is where benchmarking can be helpful. So the chart on this slide lays out the average and median collections for size. So, averages, they're kind of pulled by extremes at both ends, but they give you a sense of the center. And the median is what you see most frequently. So when we look at these benchmarks for Yarmouth that map onto dimensions of Yarmouth as a community, so Yarmouth really is comparable in different ways to both the average and the median. We can see that in every category when we're looking at adult and children's collections and teen collections, using these benchmarks, Yarmouth Town Libraries offers less than half the amount of content to its public compared to other libraries in the state. So if you're thinking about, hey, what do people access in Yarmouth? It's about half as what they would get if they just lived in another town with a smaller or bigger population in the state. And that constraint is not because of the curation and the acquisition of new material. It's because the facilities can only contain so much. This is really directly related to the buildings and the challenges around the size of the buildings. So I always think, well, somebody could say, well, do people really need more? And yes, they do in town, because there's a strong appetite for access to robust collections. And we know this because we can look at what is used in the library collections and based on what is offered. So if you look about the fourth column over, there's something called turnover rate. And that's like how often is something touched in the given year that we look at. And you can see that everything is used at least once. It's like 1.5 times per item for adults. For children, it's like everything's touched twice. So when we look at the overall use of Yarmouth's collections, it's lower because the collection is lower. So people might touch something once and then they're not going to go back. There's not something else, or there's not enough. But what is used is heavily used. People want more than the library is able to give. So we can infer that residents need more access to content. And I would say not only residents, seasonal visitors, tourists, people who kind of come through it. Residency is really not necessarily a requirement of, wanting content at the library when you're involved in the life of Yarmouth. Let's take a look at learning in terms of opportunities at the library. So it's clear that people want a modern library to support community member goals and aspirations for learning. And content's one part of the equation, but these educational opportunities are another. So we're just going to kind of helicopter through some of these. 2 out of 3 respondents who are early to mid-career want and have interest in the library providing a venue for building job skills. 1 out of 2 respondents, 57%, are interested in technology-related learning. About 1 out of 6 respondents are interested in basic English language learning. And when we focus on younger generations, kind of people up to age 39, when we kind of divide along the US segmentations for population, the level of interest doubles, meaning that under 39 years of age, 1 out of 3 people want ESL programming at the library. And then 2 out of 5 respondents to the survey are interested in getting help with something tech-related in a one-on-one session at the library. And the library, of course, is doing some of this. And some of this is also constrained, not not necessarily by staff, by simply having a space to do with people in the public that's designed for that one-on-one learning. So let's keep thinking about learning in terms of technology as a learning utility. So we know that another part of learning is people using computers, using the bandwidth, and simply put, a robust technological infrastructure impacts all spheres of life, right? We need it kind of for everything, just to get on with the business of life, not just learning, but we're just thinking about it and learning right now. So let's take a look at the tech landscape at the libraries. Each of the Yarmouth Town Libraries outlets has a modest bank of computers. So there are 13 in all. Each building has Wi-Fi. There are Wi-Fi hotspots available. People can borrow for offsite use and Chromebooks for in-house use. So really the library's kind of done everything you could possibly do within a space to kind of amp up the technology. And there's printing and scanning and copying and a whole team that will provide support with those activities. Now let's consider use. In a typical week, there are 110 users of public internet computers at these libraries altogether. And this varies during the tourist season. So of course it's quieter now, and we know it's a bonanza in the summer. It's super busy. Yarmouth offers, when compared to other libraries, 1/3 fewer public access internet computers than other libraries in the state. Now, libraries serving communities half the size of Yarmouth. So Yarmouth, ballpark, 24, 25,000, depending on who's counting and when. Libraries about 11 or 10 or 11,000 11 or 12,000 in the state. They typically offer twice as many computers for the public to sit down. So there's a demand in Yarmouth for technology, and there's just not the capacity to host this demand in the way the community wants. And so we know that this has facilities implications for needing more room and more space for the technology, not only a robust network, but to have more available for the demand. So the benchmarking helps us understand how Yarmouth is situated, but this level of use in Yarmouth suggests that an expansion of the technology is really relevant to what the community needs and what the community is asking for.
I think, Judah, before you move on to what's next, I think this is a great way to think about the piece that you brought up at the beginning about how the community needs assessment that's required as part of the grant program and then the library building program really fit together. Because I think if we take a moment to think about everything that you've brought up, right, how hardworking the library is making the most out of the space it has, and at each point has these really significant constraints. Only one meeting room, a real challenge around accessible facilities, right? Half as many public access computers, challenges to have enough shelving for the collections, even though there's a huge demand. All of these pieces, I think you can really see how they're really just tied to the severe lack of space. So when we think about, kind of expanding programming offerings and offering more diverse programs, right, catering to a wider variety of needs, and we really think about enhancing accessibility. So really making sure that not only are we, kind of having universal design principles, but also that we're ADA compliant. That piece, that we want to offer collections that really meet the needs that the community is expressing. And I think importantly, having space to put more resources, so that we could be a little bit ahead, right, of what people are asking for. And then you think about that ability to really work in partnership, strengthen partnerships that we have. So much of that is really driven around the ability to really have space. So we think about each of these things. The thing is, you can really see where the assessment piece, right, really locks in with that library building plan, and that we're really prevented from moving ahead with what people are expressing they would like now and what they see in the future by the square footage, by the buildings that we have access to. And that there's also just such a real interest, right, in actually having that conversation. What does space really look like for us in Yarmouth?
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, because it's not abstract. It's really tied into the pictures we're not showing you today are really kind of just the building blocks of what a library would look like. So to go back to just something we can probably all visualize pretty clearly, like shelf space for materials. If we say, okay, we need X number of square feet just to double the size of the collection so it's on par with the rest of the state, that shapes those numbers. The numbers aren't abstract. When we're like, okay, people want spaces for small group collaboration or individual study. It's like an individual study room is 70 square feet or 80 square feet. It's really clear how this translates. So these community needs gets translated into a library building program that I would hope for you all. In phase 2, you have an architect then do a beautiful design. For me and Stephanie, there's the great analytic part of saying, okay, this is what the community needs. And these are the Legos, but somebody's going to take those Legos and build something that's really extraordinary and makes sense for Yarmouth and fit it all together. We can just say, hey, I think these pieces fit together this way. That's really phase 2. It's really, that's a whole exciting next chapter to this journey. And so let me just circle back then to kind of, the end cap of this presentation, and I'll stop screen sharing and then we can move on with our meeting, but really just this sense of what's next. And so I think many people are, and if you're not, I will we'll follow up on this. There's some public information that we're pushing out about the upcoming meetings, such as this one, where you can really listen in to this kind of presentation, and then certainly at town meeting, weigh in, because we're all New England, we know how town meeting works. And so what's next is to really delve deeper into what you can get in a 30-minute or so review, to really drill down and say, well, what else did we learn about programs? Because there's lots of details. And so we have a draft report that's in the works that will become a public document where you can really sift through and understand what the community has to say at a fine-grained level, and continue the conversation. And then we say, and then vote, take a position with a vote, because that's our exercise. So, and that vote at town meeting is the thing that makes the decision about what happens next in the community. And that's where everybody in the room, except perhaps me and Stephanie, are, part of that decision-making and conversation. But we're certainly happy to provide you a background and a perspective that would inform how you think about that, regardless of what the outcome of the decision is. You still have the takeaways of, wow, this was this in-depth study of our community and what our community wants from libraries as we move forward. Thanks for your time.
Are you willing to take questions at this moment?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Board members, LPC folks, community members, any questions for these guys? Angela?
Hi, excuse me. I have a question. When you were talking about the turnover rate, and you were saying that with adults, it's every bit of material gets touched at least once, and for children, it's usually twice. Is that high or low? And I know it's, you're talking about averages and mean, but is that a high or low number of touches?
Right, so I think every library is really looking to have is for a turnover of 1. So when you're aiming for a turnover rate of 1, that's a key that we use to say that our collection is really meeting it or exceeding community needs. So again, that's an average, right? Some are used many, many times, some are used fewer times. But if everything on your shelf is going out in your collection is on average going out 1 time a year, that means there's a place for it. So something like a 2 for the children's is a pretty high turnover rate. Again, a lot of libraries are usually striving with their collections to meet a turnover rate of 1.
And a high turnover rate shows that there is high community engagement, high community use of the collection you have, suggesting, and yet at the same time, the overall level of circulation is low. So you have people coming in and using things, and at the same time, you can't keep adding more because there's no space.
And everything that you take away is something that people have probably used. So that's where the space really becomes a constraint.
I don't know if anyone's interested, but another parameter we often use is interlibrary loan rate, and we have a very high interlibrary loan rate, meaning about 20% of all of our circulation is going to be items coming from other libraries to fill holes because we don't have those items in our collection. Normally, we want that to be around 10 or low.
Thank you for sharing that. That perfectly dovetails, because when people are pulling, I mean, libraries share materials and that's great, but when people are pulling, your community's pulling heavily from other collections, it's because those materials aren't in your collection. And so you're doing the heavy lift and the great work of getting people those materials, which is a testament to the staff and the staff's participation in the CLAMS network. But it is absolutely symptomatic of a collection size that does not meet the needs of the community.
Can I ask a question?
Certainly.
On that point alone, would that kind of information be included in any report you give to the public? Or to the Board of Selectmen? Just that interlibrary loan component, how
I'm
much
trying-
we have to use?
Yes, the interlibrary loan is, I'm going through the report in my head. That's why I'm like, I visualize early on. Yeah, the MBLC report has early on circulation that happens in-house from your own collection, and the circulation, the number of loans, and then it has like another line that's like what's coming from elsewhere. And and part of the reason of parsing that out is for this reason, and part of the reason is also thinking about the amount of staff labor it takes to ship things to and from libraries. It's much more labor intensive to have so much come in from away, so to speak, than it is to say, hey, it's over on the shelf, let's get it together.
Our volunteer who does sorting can relate.
Yeah. It's not easier. It's not easier. So there's another cost. That's my point. There's another community cost, because that's the volunteer and staff time going to that activity could be going to something else.
Can I just ask further, but what you just told us was based on somebody sharing a statistic with us. Would you provide that information as part of your presentation so that people would be aware of it in listening to your presentation? Not that someone would have to ask a question about it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, let me think about how we could fold that. If you're like, oh, for select, if your intention of the question is, do you want to fold that statistic into the next version of this presentation? I'll take that. Yes, because
That's what I'm.
yeah,
That's
absolutely.
rather than saying
Yeah,
it's
'cause
checked once or twice.
Yeah, it's really
Go
nice.
outside to be able to provide.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I love that. It actually really dovetails nicely with the conversation about the turnover. So thanks. Great idea.
Okay.
Well, and you know that statewide that you're, like, a community is either a net lender or a net borrower. And you get more benefit from the MBLC if you're a net lender. And of course, at this point, we're a net borrower. Because
Yep.
we borrow more than we send out.
But the public probably doesn't understand that, or
Right.
even
Yeah.
the town as a community
Well,
doesn't
and-
understand that.
Right, and sometimes the leadership will interpret it differently too, so. But I'm sure Judy can finesse it and figure that out.
Yeah.
Well, the thing I really like about the net borrowing and turnover rate is net borrowing really is about, I had to get it from somewhere else because you didn't have it. It's really just for the average.
Customer satisfaction.
Yeah, you didn't have it. We want to get it for you, so we know how we can get it. But there's a time delay, and there's a little bit of, kind of like customer patron work, which sometimes we call friction, and like an environment, and not in a negative way. It's just like it was more work to get that because you might have had to come back or you had to wait for it to come. It wasn't. We live in a world that's pretty instant in lots of ways, but having something sent on delivery, then unpacked. I know Yarmouth is on it as a team, and they make this stuff happen quickly, as do its sharing libraries on the Cape, but it still takes time and it's extra steps, often an extra trip to the library.
Anything else? Yep, go ahead, please.
I have a question. Why in your presentation, I'm just asking, is it a requirement that you have average and median?
I include both because when Yarmouth is benchmarked in both ways and the outcome is the same, it's very clear that the average and the median aren't being used in a motivated way to say, hey, like we want to stack the decks. And we want to say, well, you fall behind by median when you're ahead by average. Both of these measures have different merits statistically. And when we include them both and Yarmouth is benchmarked, and it kind of falls short of peers on both of these measures. It helps provide transparency in the analysis that we haven't chosen one path or another. And when we look at the median, this is like a rule of thumb I think about for all of the Yarmouth data. A median, which is the, if you take, all the towns in Massachusetts and say there's 200, just for a round number, you're like, okay, great, right at 100, right at the middle, that's the median. Those towns at the median, that cluster, are about half the size of Yarmouth. So anytime I read the report and I go, oh, it's a median and we're falling behind the median, it means I'm falling behind towns that are half the size of Yarmouth. So you might think about that if you read through the report, and I know many of you in this room will. And then if you're thinking about average is about a town that's about 21,000. So in terms of the rough size of Yarmouth, it's certainly in the ballpark. It's not Boston, it's not, a 50,000 person town. It's a town that would be clustered in terms of population around the size of Yarmouth. So certainly a peer population wise, it's not twice as big. It's about 20% smaller. So we've used both of them because both of them have really good kind of heuristic, kind of a way to quickly think about where's Yarmouth falling for towns that are around the size of Yarmouth and towns that are half the size of Yarmouth. Ballpark.
No, yes, I understood. I understand the graph. What I'm wondering is the explanation of why you have both. Is the person who is going to be listening to this presentation understanding the difference?
I would say, I think that we could see that here, like this, probably here where we're not as steeped in numbers, probably an important distinction to make. I would guess that your town administration and your select board are pretty familiar with using both of these in terms of benchmarking that they're doing on a broader level right outside of just library work, that their familiarity with kind of the average size of the state and the mean and the median are gonna be information that they'll have as part of other projects that they're doing. And information they'll have seen in the past.
Right. I'm talking about the general public.
Absolutely.
Where does this presentation would go before the select board, but does it also go before, for instance, town meeting?
This presentation
I'm just
comes to the select board, not slated for town meeting.
I didn't hear what you said.
It's not slated for town meeting. However, this meeting is being filmed. So if anybody from the general public looked at this, the good question is, do they understand the difference between median and average?
And why?
And my guess is no. My guess is no. So my suggestion would be to make that clearer, because, yes, you're not going to say that to the select board. However, this meeting is being videoed or copied. So therefore, anybody who's not here tonight might look at that and not really understand that.
Yeah, and I think, George, you're bringing up a good piece too, in that this presentation really, in terms of for an information piece for the general public, really needs to be in part with the other pieces that are coming out. So I know that we had shared with Jane kind of the high level executive summary that we hope made it into the board packet for you all. So, that idea that you could watch this video and learn about the findings. You could read a very short, 3-page long executive summary to get an overview, or you could do a super deep dive into the report as a whole, or to use the report that to dig in. So I think when we look at the report, this is absolutely explained in the report why both are used, what the numbers are, why it's important to think of both. So for someone who might be watching this and think like, gosh, I need to know more about that, when that full report comes out, which will be when it is part of the selectmen's packet, the select board packet, people have access to all that 200 pages of information and can do as deep a dive as they like. But we're trying to really stagger the information right in ways that are helpful for different people to access, with the end goal really being emphasizing that almost no matter what number you're using, we can demonstrate that Yarmouth needs more space. So the thing I think is really important, especially because there's so many advocates in the room today, is to take a step back maybe from the detailed numbers And you can absolutely pick one that works for you in your communication, but no matter what number you use, and that's what I think, Judah, your numbers really point out, no matter what number you use, no matter what aspect of the vision plan that you're looking at, the lack of space for Yarmouth Town Libraries means we can't approach what people are asking us for. And so staying at that level of, we have half the space we need at minimum. That's the talking point I would really emphasize. That's the takeaway that I would really hope people could get from reading the report. You're at half of what you need.
I completely understand what you're saying. However, at this very moment in time, could you say clearly the difference between median and average?
So
Yeah.
it's like, oh, it's
So
a test.
therefore, if
For
somebody
math
listens
people.
to this, you're gonna have the difference.
I think we've lost that audience member, and I'm happy to answer the question.
Go ahead.
So the median is the middle. So if you have 10 numbers in a row, the median is that number that falls in the middle. And that's what we're looking at. So when we look at the entire state in terms of population size, from a town of 100 to, is Boston our largest city? Like, a town of 600,000 or 700,000. The middle of all of that is a town that's about the size of 11,800 people, give or take. That's the median. That's about size. That's the middle. So that's one way we do comparisons. The other way is the average, where we take all of those numbers and we add them up. So there's 200 towns in Massachusetts. Now I'm going to be shown up because I don't know the number of towns in Massachusetts. But say for 200.
351.
Right. We add them up and we divide and we say, oh, what's that average number? And that is the other way we can compare. So the average size town or city or municipality or municipal entity, whatever vocabulary you want to use, is around 20,600, give or take, in the state of Massachusetts, which is really nicely, in a way, in the ballpark of the size of Yarmouth. It's not a town of 80,000. It's not a town of 5,000. It's a town in terms of population bands. You'd say, yeah, Yarmouth is a comparable town in size to this when we're looking at this broad level of municipal services. It's not a town of 3,000. It's not a town of 160,000. So this is a good comparison. And so you could make arguments for using either of these measures. But as Stephanie said, when you fall short on both, you can easily say, you know what, we're behind everybody else. But for transparency, you might use both of these numbers, as I do, because if you wanted to take a motivated view to statistics, you might choose one path or another. I might be like, Mom, more kids in my class than not have Adidas shoes. Now I'm really dating myself, child of the 80s. On average, 2 out of 20 kids have Adidas. Like, what's my case I'm making here? So when we can report both of these numbers and say, hey, listen, Yarmouth is behind when we're benchmarking on both of these numbers, that's pretty astonishing, because you would hope that Yarmouth is ahead of a town in terms of size or scale of a town that's half its size.
Population-wise.
Yep, that's great. Thank you. Any more questions go ahead, please.
Yes, it appears to me that we're competing for funds from the state. And I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, what's our probability that we're going to? That's the first question. The second, because we're spending a lot of time and effort on it. The second question is, how do we compare to other library towns in Cape Cod? And then my third question is the Massachusetts, I don't know the
Board of Library Commissioners,
yes,
MBLC.
are they interested in helping a Cape Cod town, or are they interested in helping other towns? What do you think is happening? Because you have all this experience. I have absolutely none. I'm trying to get a sense of what we're doing here to help us ourselves.
So I think that I would start by saying that we think that Yarmouth has a very strong application, because of that whole conversation we just had, right, where everybody got like their little statistics studies done. Is you have a very strong case for how the physical spaces that you have are significantly limiting your ability to provide library service. That's the key thing that the MBLC is looking for. So from our perspective, what we understand about the program, they do not care if you're on Cape Cod or not. they care about the compelling story you can tell about how much your current physical footprint is limiting your ability to provide library service. So that's what the report is really focused on. That's what the grant application is really focused on. So, you know, how that looks and how they spread the money out across the state. I think they are not going to share about. Jane may have some additional information about this, but what they put forward publicly and what they ask for in the grant application is simply focused on that. Can you demonstrate that your library spaces are really limiting your ability to provide service? And I think there's such a strong case with all through the history, and then with this latest assessment, such a strong case that is true, which from our perspective makes you a very strong applicant. How you compare to other people who may or may not be, you know, considering doing the grant, that might be something Jane might know a little bit better. But from our perspective, just looking at what the grant is asking for, it's very compelling.
And just one follow-up. Have other towns on the Cape received this funding?
Eastham.
Yep.
Brewster.
I was gonna say, I went through this process in Brewster, and I would say that the MBLC isn't your biggest hurdle, it's the town, getting the town support, which is another thing that the MBLC looks at. But the MBLC, as long as you dotted all your, I'm not gonna say you're always gonna guarantee, but Brewster has a much better looking library and much bigger facilities than we do, and they had theirs rebuilt more recently, and they still were approved because they had a great application. But then you have to really campaign for the town and make it work, and that's where they fell and ran out. But that wasn't
She's right.
That wasn't because of the state, and that was because they stopped campaigning and no one came to town hall the night of the vote and spoke in favor of the library.
Plus pandemic, plus inflation,
Yeah.
plus the long wait list. I mean, there are a lot of
Yeah,
reasons.
but no one from the board or the director showed up in school at all.
Oh, I'm sorry. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think there are three, we think there are three that are gonna apply. We know that, Orleans is applying. Ford is probably gonna apply in addition to us, so you can debate the likelihood that they would give it more than one on the case.
Well, the thing is, it's not like they're giving it to everyone all at once.
It's the
Putting you
size
on
of the community.
They're giving you, you're putting you on a wait list and they're ranking you on the wait list and then it depends, so it's affecting how many years you have.
I'm not sure are they doing waitlist anymore?
Well, I'm
What?
calling it a
Are they
wait list.
doing it with waitlist anymore?
It's a shorter wait list. It's not as long as the one that was started 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But remember, they also have grants in different tiers, and it's size of the library, which is based on your population size. So it's more statewide, like Judah and Stephanie have approached it. It's a statewide competition, and it's going to be based on, you know, our compelling need for a community that's about 25,000 people
And they said,
and a swarm of summer residents.
and didn't they say that they were gonna be envisioning giving like 8 to 10 grants? to
You know, I'm afraid to jinx us, so I'm not gonna say anything about what I think it might be. I just wanna get
I was
going,
thinking
just
back
moving
to the
ahead.
Presentation that they did for everybody, that it's gonna be, they're not gonna give out 50 grants. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I don't know. It is, they figured it out from the last round that they're going to, have a shorter wait list, but I don't know how much.
Any
It
other
depends
que-
on
any
the
other questions?
bond amount that they get from the State House. It depends on how, the legislation is written and edited each year, whatever that word is, so that they can use X more percentage of the bond. It's kind of complicated.
Anything else from you folks? Great, absolutely. Judah, thank you. Stephanie, thank you. Appreciate it. But before we adjourn as a board, I want to formally recognize Catherine Pasil to my right here, who's vice chair. She served on the board for about 9 years and is stepping away, sadly. And so I'd like us to all recognize Catherine and her dedication to the board and to the town and to the library.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been an honor to be a part of such an important organization.
Thank you. Okay, I need a motion to adjourn.
Joanne Crowley has her hand
Oh,
raised. Do we
Joanne.
wanna- Let me see. Can I unmute her?
I think I can unmute myself.
Oh, good job.
There you go,
Joanne, there
Joanne.
you are.
I'm sorry to delay the close of the meeting. I know how happy everyone is when that happens. But I just wanted to, I couldn't resist complimenting Stephanie and Judah and the library board and the library planning committee for using our vision plan that the planning board as chair during its development worked so hard to develop. We wanted that document to be a living, breathing document that everyone, committees like this, would use to strengthen their story. And your presentation tonight was absolutely fabulous. I almost had tears, but not quite, because I think it
Me
was,
too.
I do believe it was the first time that it has been used as a concrete framework for positioning the town to get something, to get some money, to get some allocations from the state. So I really compliment the library planning committee and the library board for the retention of the consultants, and your you drank the Kool-Aid, and we really like that you did. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you. I need a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Joanne. Second? Do I hear a second? All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, guys. We're meeting again on the 21st.
Thanks, Judah.
Bye, everybody.
That's pretty good, right?